In the heart of medieval Europe, there existed a dynasty so shrouded in mystery that even today, over 13 centuries after their fall, historians argue about whether they were blessed by God or cursed by something far darker. They were called the Merovingians, and their story reads like a fever dream, written by history itself, part royal chronicle, part supernatural legend, part treasure map that no one has ever been able to fully decode. Picture this: kings who never cut their hair because doing so would strip them of their divine power, tombs filled with more gold than most modern nations possess, ancient bloodlines allegedly traced back to sea monsters, and at the center of it all, an assassination so brutal and politically calculated that it would inspire conspiracy theories lasting over 1,000 years. But here's what makes the Merovingian mystery truly haunting. It's not just about what we know. It's about what's been deliberately hidden, systematically destroyed, and carefully fabricated by those who came after. Tonight, we're diving deep into a story where archaeological treasure meets political intrigue, where religious persecution collides with royal bloodlines, and where the line between historical fact and elaborate hoax becomes so blurred that even experts can't agree on what's real. The Merovingians weren't just another medieval dynasty, they were something else entirely, and if you stick with me through this journey, you'll discover why their legacy continues to obsess treasure hunters, conspiracy theorists, and serious historians alike. Because buried beneath centuries of myth and manipulation lies a truth so extraordinary that powerful people have spent lifetimes trying to keep it hidden. Let's start with a question that will haunt everything we discuss tonight. How does a royal bloodline that once ruled the largest kingdom in Western Europe simply vanish from history? And more importantly, what were they trying to protect that was worth killing for? The story begins in the mists of the 5th century, in a world where the mighty Roman Empire was crumbling and barbarian tribes were carving new kingdoms from its corpse. Among these emerging powers, one group stood apart not just for their military prowess, but for something far more unsettling. The Franks, led by a mysterious figure named Merovingian, didn't just conquer territory, they claimed to be descended from something that wasn't entirely human. According to the Chronicle of Fredegar, written in the 7th century, the Merovingian royal line began with a supernatural encounter that defies rational explanation. The chronicle tells us that a Frankish king named Clodio was staying by the seaside with his wife during a summer retreat. When she went to bathe in the ocean at midday, she encountered what the chronicler called a beast of Neptune, specifically a creature known as a quinator. Now, pause for a moment and consider what we're dealing with here. This wasn't some peasant folk tale passed down through generations. This was an official court chronicle, written by educated clerics, presented as historical fact to justify royal legitimacy. The chronicler claimed that this sea creature either fathered or somehow influenced the conception of Merovingian, the founder of the dynasty that would rule the Franks for 3 centuries. Modern historians love to dismiss this as typical medieval myth-making, the kind of supernatural origin story that barbarian kingdoms invented to legitimize their rule over conquered Roman territories. But here's what they can't explain away. Why this particular story? Why not claim descent from Roman emperors or from the gods of Germanic tradition? Why invent a narrative so bizarre, so specific, that it would make the Merovingians seem alien even to their own people? The answer might lie in what came next. Because if the origin story was strange, the dynasty that emerged from it was absolutely extraordinary. The Merovingians established themselves as kings, unlike anything Europe had seen before or since. They didn't just rule, they embodied a form of sacred kingship that bordered on the supernatural. Their most distinctive feature was their hair, which they never cut. This wasn't a fashion choice or a cultural tradition. This was a source of literal power. Contemporary sources called them the reges crinici, the long-haired kings. But the significance went far deeper than appearance. A Merovingian king whose hair was cut could not rule. It was that simple and that absolute. Political rivals could remove a Merovingian from the succession not by killing him, but by forcibly cutting his hair and sending him to a monastery. The hair itself was believed to contain the divine essence that made their rule legitimate. Think about the implications of this belief system. In a world where kingship was typically justified through military might, political alliances, or administrative competence, the Merovingians based their authority on something that couldn't be faked, couldn't be stolen, and couldn't be transferred, a physical manifestation of supernatural blessing that was literally growing from their bodies. But the hair was just the beginning. The Merovingians developed a royal culture unlike anything else in medieval Europe. They treated their kingdom as simultaneously unified and divisible, a concept that baffled contemporary observers and continues to puzzle historians today. When Clovis, Merovec's descendant, and the first truly great Merovingian king, died in 511, his 4 sons didn't fight over succession. Instead, they divided the kingdom among themselves, treating it like a family inheritance rather than a unified state. This practice of partible inheritance created constant warfare and political instability, but it also revealed something profound about how the Merovingians understood power. To them, kingship wasn't about controlling territory, it was about embodying a divine essence that could be shared among bloodline members without being diminished. They weren't ruling a country, they were manifesting a supernatural authority that belonged to their family alone. And then there was the gold. Sweet Mother of God, the gold. On the 27th of May 1653, a mason named Adrian Quinquin was working on the reconstruction of the Church of St. Brice in Tournai when he struck something that would change our understanding of medieval royal power forever. Hidden beneath the church floor was a tomb containing artifacts so magnificent, so impossibly rich, that they challenged everything historians thought they knew about early medieval Europe. The tomb belonged to Childeric I, father of Clovis, and one of the first historically documented Merovingian kings. What Quinquin found inside wasn't just a burial, it was a treasure hoard that would make pharaohs weep with envy. Gold coins, intricate jewelry, a golden bull's head, a signet ring bearing the king's name, and most remarkably, 300 golden insects that had been sewn onto the king's burial cloak. But here's what made the discovery truly extraordinary. This wasn't just wealth accumulated through conquest or trade. The craftsmanship, the artistic sophistication, the sheer technical mastery displayed in these artifacts suggested a royal workshop system that rivaled anything in the Byzantine Empire or the remnants of Rome itself. These weren't barbarian trinkets. These were masterpieces created by artisans who understood metallurgy, gemstone cutting, and decorative techniques that supposedly didn't exist in Western Europe at that time. The archaeological investigation revealed even more shocking details. Childeric hadn't just been buried with treasure, he'd been interred in a massive grave mound, 20 meters in diameter, surrounded by pits containing the bodies of sacrificed war horses. This wasn't a Christian burial. This was something far older, far more primal, a ritual that connected the Merovingians to religious practices that predated Christianity by centuries. And here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Because that incredible treasure, that irreplaceable archaeological evidence of Merovingian power and sophistication, was systematically documented by Habsburg court physician Jean-Jacques Chifflet in a meticulous study published in 1655. Every piece was catalogued, illustrated, and preserved for posterity, until the 5th of November 1831, when thieves broke into the Bibliothèque Royale in Paris and stole 80 kilograms of Merovingian artifacts, including most of Childeric's treasure. They melted down the larger gold pieces and dumped the smaller, more intricate items in the Seine River. Some pieces were recovered, but the majority, including nearly all of those 300 golden insects that had made the discovery so remarkable, were lost forever. Was it random crime, or was someone trying to eliminate physical evidence of Merovingian power and sophistication? The timing is suspicious, coming just as European scholars were beginning to seriously study early medieval archaeology, and the systematic nature of the destruction melting the gold destroying the artistic integrity of irreplaceable artifacts, suggests something more deliberate than simple theft. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before we can understand why someone might want to destroy evidence of Merovingian greatness, we need to explore what happened to the dynasty itself. And that story involves political intrigue, religious persecution, and an assassination so calculated that it would echo through the centuries. The last truly powerful Merovingian king was a man named Dagobert II, and his death in 679 would become the pivot point around which all subsequent Merovingian mysteries would revolve. But his assassination wasn't just a political killing, it was the systematic elimination of a bloodline that someone, somewhere, decided could no longer be allowed to exist. The path to Dagobert II's throne was carved through exile, betrayal, and the kind of political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli take notes. When his father died in 656, young Dagobert should have inherited the kingdom of Austrasia, one of the major Frankish territories that made up the Merovingian realm. Instead, he found himself stripped of his birthright and shipped off to Ireland to live as a monk. Think about that for a moment. Here was a boy whose very hair contained divine authority, whose bloodline traced back to supernatural origins, whose family had ruled the largest kingdom in Western Europe for generations, and powerful nobles could simply decide he was inconvenient and exile him to a monastery on a distant island. It reveals something crucial about the political forces already working against the Merovingian dynasty, forces that understood the rules of sacred kingship well enough to neutralize it without direct violence. For nearly 20 years, Dagobert lived in Irish monasteries, presumably believing his royal days were over. But in 675, something extraordinary happened. Wilfrid, the Bishop of York, arranged for Dagobert's return to Francia. The details of this arrangement remain murky. Medieval chroniclers were careful not to record too much about the political mechanics involved, but suddenly, after 2 decades of exile, Dagobert was back on Frankish soil, with enough support to reclaim his throne, and reclaim it he did. Dagobert II became King of Austrasia, marking what appeared to be a Merovingian restoration. But here's where the story becomes truly sinister, because from the moment he took power, Dagobert was walking into a trap that had been decades in the making. The Frankish kingdom, by this time, was caught in a complex web of competing interests. The old Roman administrative system was breaking down, powerful noble families were consolidating regional control, and perhaps most significantly, the Catholic Church was asserting unprecedented influence over royal succession and governance. The Merovingians, with their ancient pagan traditions and supernatural claims to authority, represented something that didn't fit neatly into the emerging Christian feudal order. Dagobert's reign lasted exactly 4 years. 4 years in which he apparently tried to restore traditional Merovingian royal prerogatives, reassert central authority, and push back against the encroaching power of both nobles and clergy. Contemporary sources describe him as a strong king who despised the councils of the magnates and was contemptuous of God's churches and their bishops. In other words, he was acting like a Merovingian king was supposed to act as a sacred ruler whose authority came from sources older and more fundamental than political consensus. That attitude would get him killed. On the 23rd of December, 679, while hunting in the forest of Woëvre, Dagobert II was assassinated. But this wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. According to the life of Wilfrid, the same bishop who had arranged Dagobert's return to power, the killing was engineered by treacherous dukes with the explicit consent of the bishops. The assassin was supposedly Dagobert's own godson, a man named John, who struck him down in the forest, where no witnesses could intervene. The symbolism is almost too perfect. The last powerful Merovingian king killed by his own godson in a sacred grove with the blessing of the Christian hierarchy. It reads like a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to end not just a reign, but an entire concept of kingship that the emerging medieval order couldn't tolerate. But here's what makes Dagobert's assassination truly chilling. It worked exactly as intended. Following his death, effective Merovingian rule collapsed almost immediately. The dynasty limped on for another 70 years, but the kings who followed were political puppets, the infamous roi fainéant, or do-nothing, kings who held royal titles while real power was exercised by court officials called mayors of the palace. And those mayors of the palace? They were the ancestors of Charlemagne, the Carolingian dynasty that would eventually formalize their usurpation by deposing the last Merovingian king in 751 and establishing a new royal line blessed by the Pope himself. It was a complete transformation of European kingship, from the supernatural authority of the long-haired kings to the papal-sanctioned rule of Christian monarchs. The question that haunts everything that followed is simple. What happened to Dagobert's children? Official histories claim that his son Sigebert IV died in infancy, conveniently eliminating the direct Merovingian bloodline. But alternative accounts suggest something far more intriguing. Some sources hint that Sigebert survived his father's assassination and was spirited away to safety, possibly to the remote regions of southern France where Merovingian loyalists might have maintained hidden enclaves. This is where the story takes a dramatic leap forward in time, because over 1,000 years later, in a tiny village in the Languedoc region of France, a poor parish priest would discover something that would reignite the Merovingian mystery in ways that its original protagonists could never have imagined. The village was called Rennes-le-Château, and the priest was Berengar Saunière. What happened there in the 1,890 seconds would transform a legitimate historical mystery into one of the most elaborate hoaxes of the modern era, but also, possibly, reveal truths about the Merovingian legacy that powerful people had spent centuries trying to suppress. Saunière arrived in Rennes-le-Château in 1885, a man of humble origins assigned to minister to fewer than 300 parishioners in one of the poorest regions of France. The village church was literally falling apart, its roof leaking, its walls crumbling, its interior furnished with whatever donations the impoverished locals could manage. By all accounts, Saunière was destined for a life of quiet, pastoral obscurity. Instead, within a few years of his arrival, he had become one of the wealthiest men in the region. The transformation was impossible to hide. Saunière completely renovated the church, installing expensive stained glass windows, commissioning elaborate decorations, and adding architectural details that would have bankrupted most urban parishes. He built himself a magnificent house called Villa Bethania, complete with a private library that contained books worth more than most peasants would see in a lifetime. He constructed a tower called Tour Magdala that served as his personal study, offering panoramic views of the surrounding countryside. Most remarkably, he began entertaining guests who had no business in a remote mountain village, wealthy visitors from Paris, mysterious foreigners who arrived in expensive carriages, and according to local gossip, representatives of various European noble families. For a priest who had arrived with nothing but his breviary and the clothes on his back, Saunière was living like a Renaissance prince. The source of this wealth became the obsession of everyone who knew about it. Saunière himself offered no explanations, deflected questions, and seemed determined to take his secrets to the grave. Local rumors multiplied wildly. He had discovered a hidden treasure. He was being paid by foreign governments for political intelligence. He had uncovered ancient documents that someone was willing to pay handsomely to suppress. But the most persistent theory, the one that would eventually explode into international prominence, was that Saunière had found proof that the Merovingian bloodline had never actually died out, and that this proof was worth a fortune to the right people. The story goes that during renovation work on his church altar in 1891, Saunière discovered hollow pillars containing ancient parchments. These documents, according to the emerging legend, contained genealogical records proving that Sigebert IV had indeed survived his father's assassination and founded a secret bloodline that had been preserved in hiding for over 1,000 years. More than that, The parchments allegedly contained coded references to a secret organization dedicated to protecting and eventually restoring the Merovingian dynasty. Was any of this true? The honest answer is that we may never know for certain, because what happened next turned a potentially genuine historical mystery into a labyrinth of deliberate deception that continues to confuse researchers to this day. The transformation of the Rennes-le-Château mystery from local gossip into international obsession didn't happen by accident. It was carefully orchestrated by two French con artists who understood that the most effective lies are built on a foundation of genuine historical intrigue. In the 1960 seconds, a man named Pierre Plantard teamed up with an eccentric Belgian marquis and actor named Philippe de Chérizy to create what would become one of the most successful historical hoaxes of the 20th century. Their goal was audacious beyond belief. They wanted to convince the world that Plantard was a direct descendant of the Merovingian kings and therefore the rightful heir to the French throne. Think about the sheer audacity of this scheme. Two middle-aged French eccentrics, armed with nothing but imagination and a typewriter, decided to rewrite medieval history to support a claim to royal legitimacy. And incredibly, they almost pulled it off. Plantard and de Chérizy began by creating a series of forged documents called les dossiers secrets and depositing them in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. These weren't crude forgeries, they were sophisticated fabrications that mimicked medieval manuscript styles, used appropriate Latin terminology, and contained enough genuine historical references to fool casual researchers. The fake documents told an extraordinary story. According to Plantard's fabricated genealogy, Dagobert II's son, Sigebert IV, hadn't died in infancy, as official histories claimed. Instead, he had been secretly rescued by loyal supporters and taken to the village of Rennes-le-Château, where he founded a hidden bloodline that had survived in secret for over a millennium. The documents claimed that this bloodline had been protected by a mysterious organization called the Priory of Sion, which had allegedly been founded by Crusader Knight Godfrey of Bouillon and had operated in secret for nearly 1,000 years. But here's where the hoax becomes truly diabolical. Plantard and de Chérizy didn't just invent documents. They created an entire alternative history that wove together genuine historical mysteries, authentic archaeological discoveries, and real unsolved questions about medieval France. They took Saunière's unexplained wealth, the documented existence of Dagobert II's assassination, the historical reality of Merovingian sacred kingship, and the legitimate scholarly debates about missing bloodlines, then wrapped all of these genuine mysteries around their fabricated core narrative. The result was a conspiracy theory so sophisticated, so internally consistent, and so well researched in its peripheral details that it would fool journalists, authors, and even some academics for decades. When British authors Henry Lincoln, Michael Bagent, and Richard Lee encountered Plantard's fabricated documents in the 1970 seconds, they were so convinced by the apparent evidence that they wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail, a best-selling book that transformed the Merovingian mystery into a global phenomenon. And then Dan Brown took their research and turned it into the Da Vinci Code, a novel that sold over 80 million copies worldwide and convinced countless readers that the Merovingian bloodline was not just historically real, but central to the greatest religious conspiracy in human history. But here's what makes this story truly unsettling. Buried beneath all the hoaxes, fabrications, and deliberate deceptions, there remain genuine historical mysteries that nobody has been able to adequately explain. Let's strip away all the modern mythology and focus on the facts that even the most skeptical historians can't dismiss. The Merovingian dynasty really did rule the largest kingdom in Western Europe for 3 centuries. They really did practice a form of sacred kingship unlike anything else in medieval history. They really were associated with extraordinary wealth, as demonstrated by archaeological discoveries like Childeric's tomb, and Dagobert II really was assassinated in circumstances that remain politically murky to this day. More intriguingly, There really are gaps in the historical record that leave room for legitimate questions about Merovingian survivors. The fate of Dagobert's children is genuinely unclear in contemporary sources. Medieval chroniclers, who were usually meticulous about recording royal genealogies, become strangely vague when discussing what happened to the Merovingian bloodline after 679. And there really were regions of southern France where Merovingian loyalists might have maintained independent enclaves long after the dynasty's official collapse. Consider the broader historical context. The early Middle Ages were a period of massive political upheaval, population displacement, and the breakdown of central authority. Entire peoples migrated across continents, royal families fled into exile, and ancient bloodlines disappeared into obscurity, only to re-emerge centuries later in unexpected places. The idea that a deposed royal family might survive in hiding isn't inherently implausible. It's exactly the kind of thing that happened regularly during this period. And then there's the persistent question of why the Merovingian legacy continued to inspire such passionate interest from people in positions of real power. Why did Napoleon choose Childeric's bees as symbols of his empire? Why did various European noble families claim Merovingian descent throughout the medieval and early modern periods? Why did the Catholic Church develop such detailed theological arguments against the concept of sacred bloodlines? The answer might lie in something that both genuine historians and conspiracy theorists have consistently overlooked. The Merovingians weren't just another royal dynasty. They represented a completely different understanding of political authority, one that challenged the fundamental assumptions about power that have dominated Western civilization for the past 1,000 years. Modern political systems, whether democratic or authoritarian, are ultimately based on the idea that legitimate authority comes from external sources, popular consent, divine appointment, militarants. The Merovingians' conquest, or bureaucratic compet, claimed that their authority was literally genetic, encoded in their blood, and manifested through their physical bodies. They didn't rule because they were chosen by others. They ruled because of what they inherently were. This isn't just a difference in political philosophy, it's a completely different conception of human nature itself. If the Merovingian understanding of kingship was legitimate, it would imply that some human beings are literally, biologically different from others in ways that justify permanent hierarchical relationships. It would suggest that political equality is not just impractical but fundamentally false, contradicting the basic assumptions that underlie modern democratic society. Perhaps that's why the Merovingian mystery continues to generate such intense reactions, both from those who desperately want to believe in their survival and those who are equally desperate to debunk every aspect of their legacy. Because if there's any truth to the idea that sacred bloodlines can carry real authority across generations, it would force us to reconsider everything we think we know about the nature of political legitimacy. But we're still missing a crucial piece of this puzzle. Because the Merovingian story isn't just about medieval kings or modern hoaxes, it's about treasure, real, physical, tangible wealth that has been lost, stolen, hidden, and sought after for over a millennium. Remember Childeric's tomb and its incredible treasure hoard. Remember that most of those priceless artifacts were stolen and melted down in 1831, just as scholars were beginning to seriously study Merovingian archaeology. Remember Sauniere's unexplained wealth in Rennes-le-Château, regardless of whether it came from ancient documents or systematic fraud. And remember that we've only found one Merovingian royal burial, one tomb belonging to one king, containing enough gold to astound modern archaeologists. If Childeric was buried with such incredible wealth, what about the dozens of other Merovingian kings who ruled for 3 centuries? What about their tombs, their treasure hoards, their accumulated royal regalia? The historical record suggests that the Merovingians practiced systematic treasure burial as a form of political insurance. When kingdoms were unstable and succession was uncertain, royal families would hide portions of their wealth in locations known only to trusted family members. This wasn't just practical, It was a form of magical thinking, a way of ensuring that the dynasty's power could be reconstituted even after military or political defeat. Archaeological evidence supports this theory. Throughout regions that were once part of the Merovingian kingdom, treasure hunters and construction workers have occasionally uncovered hoards of early medieval gold artifacts. Most of these discoveries are never properly documented. The finders either keep quiet to avoid government confiscation or sell the artifacts on the black market to avoid archaeological oversight. But the discoveries that have been officially recorded reveal a consistent pattern: sophisticated goldwork, often incorporating techniques that supposedly didn't exist in Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, buried in locations that seem to follow some kind of systematic plan. It's as if someone was deliberately creating a network of hidden treasure caches, distributed across the landscape, in a pattern that modern archaeologists haven't been able to decode. And here's where the story takes another dark turn, because it appears that throughout the medieval period, various groups were actively searching for these hidden Merovingian treasure hoards. Templar knights, Benedictine monasteries, noble families claiming Merovingian descent all seem to have possessed partial information about the locations of buried royal wealth. Some of these searches were apparently successful. Medieval chronicles contain cryptic references to ancient treasures being discovered by monastery construction projects or noble hunting expeditions. But the details are always vague, the locations are never specified, and the ultimate fate of these discoveries is invariably left unclear. It's almost as if there was a systematic effort to find and consolidate Merovingian treasure while simultaneously suppressing public knowledge about what was being discovered. And that pattern of discovery and suppression has continued right up to the present day, which brings us back to Rennes-le-Château and the question that nobody has been able to definitively answer: where did Sauniere's money really come from? The official explanation that he was conducting mass fraud by selling religious services he never performed certainly accounts for some of his wealth. Church records show that he was indeed accepting payments for thousands of masses that he couldn't possibly have celebrated. But the mathematical calculations don't quite work out. Even the most generous estimates of his fraudulent income don't fully explain the scale of his spending, especially during the final years of his life when he was constructing increasingly elaborate projects. And then there are the visitors. The mysterious guests who traveled from across Europe to meet with an obscure parish priest in a remote mountain village. Some of these people have been tentatively identified through hotel records and local gossip, and they include members of prominent noble families, representatives of various European royal houses, and at least one confirmed agent of the Habsburg intelligence service. Why would such people make the difficult journey to Rennes-le-Château? What could a poor French priest possibly offer them that they couldn't obtain more easily elsewhere? The most logical explanation is that Saunière possessed something unique: information, documents, or physical artifacts that were valuable enough to attract the attention of Europe's political elite. But here's what makes the mystery truly maddening. We know that Saunière kept detailed financial records, maintained extensive correspondence, and even wrote what appears to have been a memoir during his final years. All of these documents still exist, locked away in private family archives and Vatican repositories. They could potentially answer every question about his wealth, his visitors, and his activities. And yet, more than a century after his death, these records remain sealed. The Catholic Church claims that they contain sensitive pastoral information that must be protected by clerical confidentiality. The French government maintains that they're part of ongoing historical research that can't be compromised by public disclosure. Private collectors insist that they're protecting the documents from sensationalist exploitation, but the result is the same. The evidence that could resolve the Rennes-le-Château mystery definitively remains hidden from public scrutiny, which raises an uncomfortable question that goes to the heart of everything we've discussed tonight. Who benefits from keeping the Merovingian mystery unsolved? Because at this point, we're not just dealing with ancient history. We're confronting a pattern of information suppression that spans over 13 centuries, from the systematic destruction of Merovingian records after Dagobert's assassination to the modern hoarding of documents that might shed light on their ultimate fate. And that pattern suggests something that should make us all deeply uncomfortable. There are still people alive today who have compelling reasons to ensure that certain truths about the Merovingian legacy never come to light. So where does this leave us, standing at the edge of 13 centuries of mystery, deception, and unanswered questions? We've journeyed from the supernatural origins of kings whose hair held divine power, through tombs filled with impossible wealth, to a modern world where truth and fabrication have become so intertwined that even experts can't separate fact from fiction. We've seen archaeological evidence systematically destroyed, historical records deliberately suppressed, and elaborate hoaxes constructed around genuine mysteries that nobody wants us to solve. The Merovingians were real, their sacred kingship was real, their extraordinary wealth was real, Dagobert's assassination was real, and the systematic effort to erase their legacy from history was absolutely real. But here's what haunts me most about this entire story. The pattern of suppression hasn't ended. From medieval chroniclers who grew mysteriously vague when discussing Merovingian survivors, to 19th-century thieves who melted down irreplaceable artifacts, to modern archives that keep crucial documents sealed behind walls of bureaucratic secrecy, someone, somewhere, is still working to ensure that we never learn the complete truth about this dynasty. The question isn't whether the Merovingians left behind hidden treasures or surviving bloodlines. The question is why, after 13 centuries, powerful people are still afraid of what we might discover if we dig too deep into their story. Because in a world where most medieval mysteries have been solved or abandoned, the Merovingian legacy continues to inspire both passionate believers and equally passionate debunkers. That's not the behavior you'd expect around a dead historical curiosity. That's the behavior you'd expect around a secret that's still dangerous to someone alive today. And until we understand who that someone is and what they're still protecting, the mystery of the long-haired kings will continue to haunt the shadows of history, waiting for someone brave enough to finally uncover what's been hidden for over 1,000 years.